Welcome to another edition of the Friday FARcast. I'm Robert Phoenix. In a few minutes, I'm going to reach out through the fantastic technology of Skype. And there's my Cardinal friend checking in with me. What's going on, Cardinal? I've got a relationship with these cardinals. They're hanging out in this tree right in front of my window. And when I do the broadcast, I come over and they actually say hi. In fact, I believe they've got a nest either in the roof just above to the left of me or right across in the tree from me. Anyway, they'd like to check in with me at the start of the broadcast. I think it's a good sign. Well, welcome to today's show, and it's going to be a very interesting show indeed. I'm going to be using Skype here for the very first time through Spreaker, so bear with me as I kind of go through the new techniques and some of the new technology that I have to kind of master in order to make this a smooth broadcast, and we'll be doing that momentarily. I'll kind of lay out the show for you today. I'm going to be calling up a man by the name of Chris, who happens to be a reader of the website and a listener of the show. And he had heard my podcast or stream from a few days ago, and I was talking about what's happening with language and children and identity and what's taking place on college campuses, and what I believe will take place in boardrooms across the country, HR departments across the country. If you have not been following the news, North Carolina has been forced to repeal their stance on bathrooms. And it was the NC2A and all of their college sports, whether it's baseball or basketball or football, they were strong-arming the state of North Carolina because they were keeping events away. And when it comes down to it, it just comes down to money. Money is the crowbar that makes people do things. You either incentivize them or you take it away and make it painful. And through that process, we have conformity. And maybe this is why, if you go back into the Christian mythos, Jesus talks about the sort of simplicity and the vows of poverty, because if you were living at a certain level, you can't be compromised, right? I mean, how much more can you be compromised if you don't have any debt and you live a simple life and you're not, engaged in kind of the extravagance of one's belongings. So this is what's going on. Anyway, he heard it, and we're gonna talk about what it's like to be a parent of a child that is in a form of gender doubt, gender transition, and I think it's going to be a really interesting and very frank show, open and honest. I want to play one thing before I bring Chris on and try to do this Skype pass off. I wanted to play and I've done this before. It's a, let's do this here. It is a poem by W.B. Yeats. It's called The Second Coming, and I found a recording that Ted Hughes did. Ted Hughes, of course, the former British poet laureate, the former husband of the late Sylvia Plath. He does a much better job of reading this than I could. So let's listen to Ted Hughes, and then I'll tell you why I'm playing this today.
The Second Coming by W.B. Yeats. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The centre cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming. Hardly are those words out, when a vast image out of Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in sands of the desert, a shape with lion body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun, is moving its slow thighs, while all about it reel shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born?
Every time I hear that poem, it evokes new feelings, and as it relates to where we are socially and culturally, every time I play it, and I play it every maybe 3 years or so, because I think that was the last time I brought it into the mix, and it feels even more resonant now that we are losing touch with the center. And the falcon and the falconer cannot hear one another. And as we move into today's topic of conversation, and we explore the whole program of gender dysphoria, transgenderism, synthetic biology, and the assault on language, we move further and further away from any kind of meaningful or familiar center. So let me get into the Skype world here, see what happens, see if I can figure this thing out. First time I've done it, so bear with me. We'll have Chris on. Yes, we have Soundflower. Okay, Soundflower. All right. Okay, yes. All right, end. All right, so I just have to make a Soundflower right there. Yeah. Okay, stereo Soundflower. All right, so let's connect to Skype. Try this again. Right. Installed. Yes, we got that. So we have that. Make a call and start recording. Oh, I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to make that call and start recording. Let me see if it, hold on. Let's try that. I'm just trying to figure this damn thing out. Let's see. And if I have to do this, I'll do it on another computer. And I'll figure. All right, so start a Skype. Call on Skype. Okay. All right, I'm just going to try to. Okay, so let's do this. There we go. I have to go external. Okay, here we go. Skype-rama, hang in there. Yeah, we have progress. Okay. Right. So I'm going to open the window here. Again, please bear with me. Just technology is so fussy sometimes. Yes, fussy. Okay, so I have the dial pad up. Let me go into the number. Let's see what happens here. It's going to be worth it. Trust me. We're going to have a good show today. Just hang in there. Close this as myriad of windows. Because what I really want to do is just get to right here. Okay, let's go. Hey, Chris. Let's see what we got here. Hold on. Can you hear me okay? I can. You're a little buzzy in my head. Let me just let me turn some things down here. Okay, keep going. Let me get a level on you. Yeah, yeah. I think I've got to pot down a little bit on the audios. Let me just do. Let me try that. Okay, go ahead one more time. Yeah. 2. We got a test. Good. All right, so here we are. Let me set the stage. We're talking with Chris from Terra, and Chris is a parent of a child that is going through some of the gender transition and challenges that some parents across the globe are going through. And Chris has been a reader and a kind of a listener to the site for a while, and I've gotten to know Chris a little bit through personal interaction and some sessions and stuff. And he's a great guy and very frank and open and honest, and I always appreciate that when he either adds a comment or has something to share. So I'm looking forward to what he is willing to share with us today. And first of all, I want to thank you for coming on, because this is kind of a very personal subject and topic that you're going through and that other people are going through. So I want to thank you for that. And I also just want to start with maybe if you can give us some background as to, what kind of original sex or gender that your child was born as, what their age is, and where this all started to happen, and we can just, I think, go from there.
Okay. Thanks for the kind words, by the way, and also thanks for the opportunity to do this. I will say right off the bat, I was a little bit conflicted about this. I didn't want to be seen as a transgression of any sort, but I figured that there was probably some greater value, and to be honest, I wanted to do this for me, and I kind of get to do that, I guess. So yeah, I was presented with 2 daughters in my experience here, a couple of years apart, and they, as they grew up, it became pretty evident that they couldn't be more different in terms of the way they presented themselves. Not unsurprising, I know a little bit about the dynamic of first and second child, et cetera, but some things were fairly evident early on with the younger one. And it's the younger child that we'll be speaking about today, in my experience with them. There were the typical sort of tomboy attributes, very strong-willed, very creative, in many ways just a typically exuberant child. And things didn't really start getting, I hesitate to use the word difficult, because I see all this as just part of a process, but things changed a bit several years ago and 2 high schools ago, I think, when they were befriended by a young man, and I believe this is sort of their first romantic interest, if you will.
So they meaning both girls?
Oh no, let me clarify. I am now conditioned to use they them pronouns.
Oh boy.
They would prefer him and her, but I'm sorry, I'm just not gonna do that.
Okay, so they being your daughter. How old was your daughter at that point in time in high school?
Let's see, it's like around the 13-ish.
Okay.
14-ish.
Do you see how confusing that was? I mean, you said they, and I immediately thought that both your daughters were in high school and they were having a relationship with the same guy. You see how confusing that was just from the jump?
Right, I do. And, it kind of hits at one of the core things about so many of these things that twist my brain are centered around how we are choosing to use words, or if I can use the term, pervert the usage of words.
Right.
And I'll point out that the term transgender itself is a bit of a difficult one, in that in one sense we're being told that gender is strictly a social construct. It's something that is impressed upon us by society. It has no strict point of reference. Well, then I would contend that we need to be talking about transsexuals, because we're talking about transition from one sex to another, and yet the term transgender has been adopted, which to me says, well, what are you transitioning from? If it's a construct, then how is it possible to transition from one construct to another?
Mm-hmm.
In any meaningful way. It just simply becomes confusing, I think.
Yeah, and the whole premise of trans is it's rooted in transitional and transitory and transfer. There's no sense of arriving or being at one place. It's this constant kind of state of stasis and ambiguity. It's a very, I think it's quite dangerous, but I'm going to shelve my opinion for a minute. So let's go back to high school. They meet a guy. We can call him a guy. Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
And I met this young man, and it was very clear to me he was very effeminate, right?
Yeah.
Kind of charismatic, and it turned out that he sort of led this little posse of folks in the school. Long and short of it, that sort of relationship went very south quite fast. Just in terms of how they interacted. He wasn't a very nice kid, especially to my child. And I contend one of the things that they introduced my child to, though, was self-harm. This child was very much into cutting.
Mm-hmm.
And lo and behold, my younger one emerged with a propensity for doing the same to self.
So she started to cut. She started to cut, and when you saw that as a parent, how apparent was that? Did you stumble upon it? Did she confess it? And what was your wife's response to this?
The response was, of course, fear,
yeah.
terror. No understanding, of course, on my part about how that sort of comes to be the behavior of choice. We were clued into it, I think, by some people at school. One thing about this younger child is that they're very open about things. They'll talk about stuff, very, very frankly when they're comfortable doing so. But, that was sort of the beginning of the pricking up of the ear and saying, okay, there's something going on here that's a little more, that warrants greater attention and greater intervention, I guess.
So she's introduced to cutting by this self-trained budding sociopath, and
yes.
and so at that point, what happens to the relationship between her and the future cult leader?
It went south fairly quickly. Said sociopath was really about controlling their posse, and would have no problem sort of gathering up the group to attack somebody for whatever reason. So it was a very adept summation of their persona in the whole cult leader sociopath thing.
Yeah.
And they fell victim to that. And to this day, when that individual's name is brought up, there's a very strong angry response, which is understandable. So that was sort of the red flags started popping up, pay a little closer attention. And the rest of it didn't really become apparent until a couple of schools after that, where it really started coming to the fore. Yes, this is how I'm going to identify. He, him. I have gender dysphoria.
Okay,
And we also
let me just stop here for a second. Okay,
sure.
You've mentioned 2 schools, a couple schools later.
Yep.
Now, was this because you moved, or was this because they were trying to find a more comfortable student body to relate to? What was the process of this journey through these different schools?
It's definitely the latter. We've remained in the same home, but
Okay.
there has been a constant challenge with this one, getting them to fit into the current school model. You know, they, for better or worse, they are my child. I also did not fit into the school norms.
So you could relate. You
You
could relate on some level. You could relate on some level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, we tried a different charter school. You know, that didn't work out so great because the population will, you know, had its share of, you know, challenging individuals. So then they selected another school, which they're currently attending, which is very much more in tune with how they present themselves. There are many children, in fact, in this school that identify as non-binary or trans. You know, so it was, if nothing else, it was at least a group of their peers.
Mm-hmm.
So we haven't necessarily seen a great improvement in the academic achievements, but, you know, at least they're in an environment where they're more comfortable, I suppose.
Now, what grade level are they in at this point, right now?
Oh, that's a good one. They've been held back a couple times. I think they consider them a junior in high school.
Okay, so junior, but what, approaching 18, perhaps?
Very, very close to 18.
Okay,
yes.
So she's old. They are older than perhaps most of the student body at that age. Certainly at the junior level.
They are.
Okay, how is their academic performance?
Atrocious.
Okay. So it feels
no interest really.
So it feels to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, and clearly I want to be very sensitive here, but it feels to me like they're going through a complete collapse and a rejection of a number of different values, identities, and institutions. Is that correct?
Certainly, yes. And, you know, as any teenager, I think, is not subject to any sort of, you know, dogma or anything that's hammered into them by their parents. You know, my parenting philosophy is maybe different from some, but, you know, I believe in giving the kids the space and the tools to explore self. And I'm not going to tell them how to be or what they should think, because I think that's productive. So I see them reaching out, you know, to try to find a place to fit, and that's totally normal to me. Because believe it or not, I can remember what it was like to be a teenager, looking around and thinking, God, I'm supposed to fit into this model? I don't think so.
Right.
You know. So a big part of what I'm trying to balance here, Robert, is what are my responsibilities as a parent, you know, in terms of protecting this child from going too far in one direction? You know, because we're talking about some of these medical interventions we're looking at. Some of that stuff is simply not something that you can walk back from easily. You know, it's not like getting a bad tattoo or a piercing or something where, you know, you might think, wow, that was kind of silly. We were talking about radically altering the physiology of a human being.
That's right.
And
that's right. And I just to let you know, I did a little bit of background before we came on the air, and I have some statistics that I ran across that have to do with the process, what happens with people, young people, as they are in this transgenderific state. But I also saw that there was about a 40% regret rate, which is very high, extremely high. And out of that regret rate, the amount of suicides is as fairly high as you could imagine. And there are two studies I'm going to share with you here. This one goes back to 2010, and this was not done by a sort of right wing or Christian organization. This was done by the National Center for Transgender Equality and the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force. This was back in 2010, and 41% of the transgender people in the United States have attempted to commit suicide. This is coming from their world, right? So the level of regret is staggering. It's almost half. And hold on a second. The regret is more than half, I'm sure. The amount of committed or attempted to commit suicide is nearly half. So your concern as a parent is deeply warranted.
And these are people that have gone through the transition?
That's right. This comes from 2010, and this comes from, again, the National Center for Transgender Equality and the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force. They released this study in October 2010. 41% of the transgender people in the U.S. have attempted to commit suicide, and that's based on that's 41% that have attempted. What about the 15 to 20% or the 30% that haven't, that are living in, for all intents and purposes, a situation that they cannot reverse? So I threw that out there. There's another statistic that I wanted to bring to your attention because when we were talking about this yesterday, I just briefly, I wanted to see what's going on here. And this is a new study. This is from the Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center. And they say that 30% of transgender youth report a history of at least one suicide attempt. That's a third. It's a third. 42% report a history of self-injury, such as cutting. So, they are evolving towards becoming a statistic. You're running into statistical data here that is alarming. And this is not a judgment on parenting. Just as a parent, I would be freaked out. And I think what you're attempting to do, because I know you a little bit, and I know you have really strong opinions. Like culturally, you and I vibrate. There's a reason why you connect with the material, because that's a big part of you. And I also see that you're doing your best to be a really compassionate and loving and accepting parent. And it's a kind of an amazing yoga and alchemy that you've got going on there. And how do you work through some of this? Because I know you, and I know some of the things that you stand for, and yet on the front lines of your life, you're allowing this young person to kind of have their own reality. It's a very interesting dynamic.
The challenge for me, Robert, is to try to be as close to Mr. Spock as I can.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't say that in a flippant manner. Spock was half Vulcan, half human.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm not going to deny my human side, but I try really hard to separate the reactive, emotional component from my insane Virgo attributes. I have to live in logic.
Mm-hmm.
I have to process things and understand them from a higher overall perspective. And so much of this stuff just does not add up.
Yeah.
It just does not compute. And here's an example. The second relationship that my younger child had that went on for over a year, was with a young person who was born a male, who identified as female, so also a transgender, only playing the role of a female. They were together in a relationship and both considered themselves extremely gay. So, to me, I mean, part of me just wants to say, hey, look, kids, you're a boy and a girl together. You know, that's okay. You know, but God forbid if you step over that line and question somebody's self-identification. You know, but logically, not a lot of this stuff makes sense, including the attitudes of some of the healthcare professionals.
Well, let's talk about that, because now the state apparently has become the third parent in this equation. Do you want to talk about that?
From what perspective? I'm not sure.
Well, the psychiatrist, right? You're dealing with a psychiatrist now. Is that correct?
There's a couple of them.
Is that private, or is that in conjunction with a school? Is there a state kind of board or voice kind of operating in the background here?
This is all just stuff that we've guided them towards. You know, hey, you need to talk to somebody. Let's sort this out.
Okay, so this is somebody that you've worked with, and they're working with them, and
well, they had been working with an individual just sort of on, you know, the self-harm, the general,
okay,
let's get better at school stuff. They sort of recused themselves from anything to do with the transgender issues simply because it's not their area of expertise.
Okay.
So just yesterday, in fact, we had our first meeting with another individual who does specialize in this because, you know, as a minor child, in order to, you know, legally be able to undergo the hormone replacement therapy that they're seeking, there has to be some approval from a mental health professional.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there has to be some documented history. You have to jump through some hoops to do this. And this makes me feel good in a way that, you know, in most cases, they're not just going to say, oh, yeah, you know, you want to make this change? You know, here's your testosterone. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
Always, you know, I will say, though, you know, you can go on YouTube and you can find the little kid saying, hey, you know, here's a video on how to get your parents to find the right doctor. You know, that exists. And the guy that we met yesterday said, you can go shop around. You know, you can go find somebody who will just sign up.
Wow.
I'm not that person.
Wow.
So, you know, there's a really interesting position that was put out by the American College of Pediatricians, who, you know, came to the conclusion, you know, that we're really not doing these young people any good by making these radical interventional steps. The head of this organization, I believe his last name is Zucker, was like a 30-year head of, you know, an organization that worked for gay and transgender rights. Mm-hmm. And when he came out with this position and said, you know, maybe we should rethink this, he lost his position. Let's just say that. He was removed from his spot.
Interesting. So you know, unless he was willing to basically paddle with the current, he was not going to be able to maintain his position. Wow, that's something.
Yeah. And, you know, that's one of the main things I had difficulty with, Robert. If we're going to call gender dysphoria, you know, a mental illness or something that's not right, then why, in God's name, would we take medical intervention to get the person to conform with those quote unquote you know, misguided notions of self? That doesn't make any sense to me. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, there are people out there that believe that their right arm doesn't exist, that it should have been amputated, and they will seek out amputation of their limbs. Well,
I've actually heard of this.
Yeah, I mean, that's a real thing. So, again, logic fails in some instances.
Okay.
And it's you know, when you ask about how I've dealt with this, man, I'll be straight up with you. I'm shattered, man. My whole conception of who I am, you know, what I am, I've been forced to look at a lot of stuff over the last year or two.
Uh-huh.
You know, I thought I was going to skate by this life and sort of, you know, keep my head down and, you know, play a little guitar and have some fun. No, sorry, you know, the stick has come out and I've been swatted at some time. So, okay.
Yeah.
I get to grow too, but, yeah, see, I don't want to get too much into the paranoia of thinking that there's an agenda behind a lot of this. You know what I'm saying? But it becomes more and more difficult to not see a bigger picture that concerns me.
Yeah. Well, I would, and I have in my peregrinations have determined that there certainly is an agenda. And that could get you in trouble, I think, with social services. Hold on one second. This is the CIA coming in to disrupt our conversation. Hold on. You see, I know this is the CIA because they do this every week during my show. And,
Nice.
and I don't even have any grass. It's all just rocks. No, I'm just kidding. Look, I'm here to really understand your position and try to put myself in your shoes as a parent, because I've got a kid and he's 13, and it's not in the same kind of environment perhaps, and maybe he's not in that same kind of state either. But I clearly would be very tied up on the inside if I had to go through what you're going through. And of course, I would lash out because that's it's part of who I am. So I would look around socially and I'd get pissed off because I would see what was going on. And I think in order for you to retain your sanity in a very trying situation, you want to minimize as much of that as possible. That's my sense. And keep it as personal as possible and in-house as much as possible. Let me ask you a question. What if this psychiatrist said to them, we've done some studies here and we've looked at your past, and we really don't think that you're a good candidate for transitioning. Would they accept that on face value, or would that lead to another collapse and then trying to find another psychiatrist who ultimately at the end of the day would rubber stamp it? What do you think would happen if they were presented with that kind of a verdict?
Well, it's been verbalized, in fact, just yesterday, that they are, quote unquote, okay that this never happens. So, and then there have been some things, like they share with their mother, I think, more than me about this stuff. But, it's been put forth that, gosh, maybe this isn't really what I want to do. So there's not, a strong set-chin drive to do this hell of high water. I can see that there's some real dialogue going on there, and I'm grateful for that. But I also get that within their peer group, it's going to be really hard to back down from this position, because you get these appointments and it's like hitting the home run, Hey, I get to go see the doctor, and I just don't know how strong they're going to be if it comes to that being the decision they arrive at, actually merging into that, at least within their current social circle. That's my concern there.
Let me ask you a question about them.
Yep.
Do they have any interests? Are they good at anything? Singing, playing guitar like yourself? Are there hobbies, passions, things that they're involved with that give them a sense of self in some ways?
This child has a remarkable ability to draw themselves. They're an artist. They are a passionate animal lover.
Mm-hmm.
They're fascinated with geology. And when they are passionate about something, the way they throw themselves wholeheartedly into it is very encouraging. yeah, there's so many aspects of this individual that are just waiting to be given wings. I just want to make sure that all this other bullshit, pardon my language, doesn't become an excuse, and I know we talked a little bit about disempowerment, Robert, if you see these kids online, when they talk about who they are, it's like, well, I'm Billy, and they don't say I like puppies and I water ski. They say, and I am bipolar, and I cut myself, and I have this diagnosis. There's real currency in having these disadvantages in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost celebrated.
Yeah, it's. I hate to say it, but it's celebrating the victim. It's this whole culture of victimhood and vulnerability, which is celebrated. It's like you're courageous, you're heroic. Look at what you're admitting and being open and honest with, which to some degree is not necessarily a bad thing. But let's be real, let's say you have stage 4 cancer and you tell the world. That's being pretty courageous. You look at people in the eye and say, I have stage 4 cancer and I'm not coming back, pretty much. It's going to take a real miracle. I mean, that's something. And I think what's happened is our culture has gotten to this point where we, it's kind of like when we have a quote unquote event. Whether you think these events are real or not. Like, say, the Paris nightclub or what happened in Westminster a week ago. And you have a group of people around the world say Paris strong or Orlando strong or San Bernardino strong. And there's this kind of fomentation of the celebration of the victim. We're celebrating, and I noticed this with 9/11. I remember after 9/11, I was trying to, I knew what happened with 9/11. I just had to sort out, who the players were, and that didn't take me very long. But as I was with somebody, and they wanted to go to this 9/11 vigil, and we all walked together and stuff like that. That was kind of the beginning of this, the celebration of trauma. We celebrate trauma, and these children are becoming like these icons of that kind of what I would consider a real decline in our culture. And I'm sorry, I'm just going to be straight up. It's a terrible decline, and they've been encouraged because in many ways the other kinds of ways in which they could celebrate their selfhood or their self-determination or their self-directed activity in their life have been discouraged. It's kind of like achieving is a sin. It's a venal sin if you achieve. If you stand up or you stand out, you're putting shade on other people because they're not getting really amazing grades or they didn't raise the fattest pig or whatever it is. And socially, what happens is that we have these gatekeepers, which I think, and I don't have any hard evidence around this, but I can kind of feel into it, that we have these social gatekeepers that if those situations do occur, that they would tend to play them down or perhaps even shame them. That's my sense. And it's unfortunate because one of the things that children will do is they'll look for acceptance with their peer group. And if their peer group is celebrating a kind of cult of vulnerability and victimhood, then we're in trouble. That's my sense.
Yeah, the Oppression Olympics. Wow, is that the black helicopter ride?
Yeah, it only does it when I talk. When you talk, they kind of go away.
Jesus.
No, I'm just kidding. Now I'm going to move the show to 11 o'clock on Fridays, only because apparently I've got to get off of the schedule here, which is kind of new, interesting. Well, let's get back to I want to talk about assignation in determining and using a name for an identity. You have used them and they, child, which I respect. Now, are you doing that out of respect for them, or are you doing this because there is some kind of deal or mandate that you kind of have to participate in this level of language?
It's out of respect. If there were a mandate, I would be just as likely to say, F off on that. I don't. There's some lines that I'm not going to cross, and nobody's going to tell me what words can come out of my mouth ever. I'm sorry.
If you were to say to them, I'm going to call you she and her and my daughter until otherwise, how do you think they would respond? Would you alienate them, or would you set up a whole nother kind of level of dialogue?
Well, that really gets to a core suspicion. I tend to think that there would be alienation. And my suspicion is that all along, I think that I may have been set up to be the gatekeeper to prevent this from happening. Now, this is just my suspicion on this, okay? But judging by the shock that was present when I was the one that called up and made the initial appointment with the endocrinologist, it was unexpected. We did have a big blow up not long ago when I confided in the sister. I said, hey, what do you think is going on here? Do you think this is genuine? And in that conversation, I said, you can't please share this with your sibling, but it may be that if things go a certain way, that I'm going to have to say, no, you can't do this. And that got back to them. The older child ran to them and said, well, Papa's gonna keep you from doing this.
Oh boy.
And that wasn't the case at all. So
you are a better man than me. I'm telling you that right now. Okay. Because I'm having a moment of honesty here. I'm not sure I can hang out with that. As much as I would love to be a great parent and be a part of it, I think I would go nuts, and I would have to remove myself from that situation. That's just me, and maybe I could come back to it later after I'd gained some kind of clarity or some other process had been worked out. But I don't know if I could. I don't know if I could hang out with that. And I think this speaks to your level of love and compassion in some ways. It's like it's really kind of. I mean, I think it's kind of heroic, and I'm being straight up. No, there's another part of me, and I'm being honest, which is like, man, just draw some lines here. Be the dad. Draw some lines. Say you're a girl, you're a she, and until you flip that switch, this is my position. But I don't live there, and I'm not in your skin, and I don't have the same kind of background and the things that motivate me that you do. So I can't really be in any kind of judgment with your position. But I'm just telling you, I would have a very difficult time, and I think, on some level, you're doing something kind of amazing with your own humanity. Let me ask you a question. Where is your wife and their mom's position around this?
I would say that in general they have the same mindset about it. She's the breadwinner. She's the one that's at work, toiling away in, corporate world every day. I'm the one that gets to deep dive and try to figure out what the hell's going on here. So I've had the benefit of a lot of exploration, a lot of research. So I think in a way, she's there to support me and to support our child. and she plays a different role. You know, we are two parts of a pretty good working whole, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So we have our strengths and weaknesses, and you know, she's more of the confidant, and that's cool. It was made very clear yesterday in our meeting that I don't get to say things that are uncomfortable to the child. If I start talking about something, I either get shouted down or, you know, no, I don't want to talk about this. I don't get to talk about this. So, you know, we have our different roles. But generally speaking, I think we're on the same page. We want this kid to emerge from all of this intact and, you know, as much by their own effort as possible. You know?
Let me ask you a question. Let's say green light goes on, and here you go, hormone replacement therapy, and a year from now we'll revisit and we'll look at surgical possibilities, and they go down that path.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden you have a son, and let's be honest about that.
Yeah.
And let's say a year and a half down the line, all of a sudden they're in that 30 to 40%. How would you deal with that? Would you say that this was their path? That I gave them as much of a wide berth as possible and tried to step back so that they could explore whatever it is they were exploring to the point where life became so unbearable that they couldn't explore anymore, and they decided to pull the plug on it, or at least try to. I mean, in some ways, that's like kind of the ultimate kind of parenting. You're letting your kid, whether they want to be a race car driver or go through this, you're kind of allowing them to participate in some evolution. But I guess the question is, how would you feel about that?
I would make the best effort I could to just simply view this as their, like you said, as their path.
Uh-huh.
You know, they're going to be 18 really soon.
Yeah, that's going to be out of your control at that point.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm under no illusions, though, that my parental duties and responsibilities and role as a parent stop, you know, when that happens.
Yeah.
And look, you know, I was a free-range kid. You know, I was raised up, single parent, you know, radical feminist mom, but fortunately, no ideology impressed upon me. The only thing I knew emerging from my childhood was that my mother loved me unconditionally and supported me unconditionally.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I want to be. I want to be that.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I'm not going to judge my child.
Yeah.
I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm going to protect them as best I can. I'm going to try and be an example for them. But, you know, judgment doesn't get you anywhere.
Yeah.
You know, that comes from a position of fear and uncertainty of self, I think. So I guess, for better or worse, I'm willing to let my kids crash into walls, fail spectacularly, and then just make sure they know that I'm going to be there to help them sort it out and grow from it.
Well, that's an amazing form of parenthood, and whether they know it or not, they're incredibly lucky to have you as their father.
I appreciate you saying that, Robert, because sometimes, you know, there's a little part of me that goes, you know, why don't you just try putting the foot in the ass and being the big, scary guy that I'm supposedly, you know, identified as. You know?
It's not your style, man. It's not who you are.
No, it's not.
It's just not. So, you know, you have to, you know, allow for that to, you know, come to the fore. It's not my style. I wouldn't do it, but that's me and that's not you, and we're two totally different beings. Let me ask you a question here. What have you learned that you could share with another parent who's going through something like this? Is there anything that you've kind of uncovered Because there's some parents out there that are probably totally freaked out, don't know what to do, and they've got this reality, sleeping in their house every night. What would you share with them?
Don't ever buy your kid an iPhone and let them see the world through that lens.
Oh, that's
don't give a 13-year-old an iPhone and let them spend all day on BuzzFeed or Tumblr. That's I know that sounds kind of silly in a way, but I knew what would happen. I knew what would happen if that kid was given that window. And I resisted it for a long time.
Yeah.
And I kicked myself for just, and then I don't know. It gets back to the point with, how much you want to try to intervene and guide. I've also become very aware of the debate that's going on within the mental health and the medical community about this. It's not something that's proceeding unimpeded. There are many factions that are saying, "Hey, wait a minute, let's pump the brakes on this a little bit," and that's encouraging. Because to be honest, a few years ago when I first came upon this, I could not believe that they were doing. There's a kid in St. Paul here that was gender reassigned at 5 years old. Yeah. And they said, well, the kid would prefer to play with dolls and wear dresses. Well, you know what? I played with dolls and wore freaking dresses because I was raised by a single mom. That's what I modeled. That was the behavior I modeled. And it's pretty safe to say I'm thoroughly a heterosexual male,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But, those sort of behaviors are being interpreted differently now. And this, I'm going to sound like a bigot here. It didn't surprise me to learn that the parents of that child were both female. It was a lesbian couple raising a young boy. Oh, what a shock. He's wearing dresses and acting all girly. Let's get him reassigned. And they effing did it.
Look, I think it's a travesty. I think we're in a very precarious place socially, culturally, and my take around all this is that even the trans kind of gender sort of platform is really a transitional state to transhumanism, because this is where all this is headed. And in the whole notion of whatever it is to not just be a man or a woman, the whole notion of what it is to be a human is going to be up for grabs. And this is sort of the sliding patio door, into that. It's not the front door; it's a sliding patio door, kind of on on the side of the house, through the guest bedroom or something. This is how it's going to get inserted into our culture. And the next thing you know, we're going to have various forms of augmentation and hybrids and you name it. And it's just going to be up for grabs. And what we know as, or what used to pass for human will potentially be a thing of the past. And it will be actually, what's really interesting, but looking at what's going on with, this whole notion of white genocide. And one of my clients and followers brought to my attention what's going on in South Africa, which is where they're basically going. It's like a rampage, and they're finally doing what they did in formerly Rhodesia and now Zimbabwe. They're going in, they're taking farms, and they're brutalizing, the white farmers who are still there in South Africa, and we're starting to see kind of a version of this now in Northern Europe with the invasion of essentially what's ISIS in Northern Europe, Western Europe. And we're having some of this in this country too with the breakdown of race relations. And the idea now is that the world's ills are the white male. It's the white man. Just kill off the whites and everything will be okay. And this is a prevailing thought right now. And it's a very dangerous thought. But I'll tell you what will happen is that the same ills and the same sins that plagued the world when the white species walked the earth will still be there. And then it's because we're human.
Yeah.
We're human, and that's the big problem. We've got to kill off the humans. Humans are a plague. And that's when the transmodification and all the, get away from as much as being human as possible, because that's a disease. We're in very precarious times. And I don't know what it's going to do to change the tide, because you change the tide, you're shouting in the wind, really. And we've seen what happens because the forces of political correctness, social Marxism, techno-fascism, they'll just shout you back down or they won't even listen. And we're in a fight for our humanity. This is where we are.
Yeah.
And one could say, on the one hand, that because you pose a really interesting question here about what is the nature and the responsibility of a parent through their humanity. Are you allowing somebody's humanity to be taken away from them, or are you acting in the most humane way possible? And I don't have an answer to that question. But it's a very interesting dynamic, and you're right in the center of it.
Well, all I can do is hope for, the best resolution for all. And a lot of these questions that you bring up, I don't see as necessarily, I don't think it's wrong to question, what we are as a society and what needs to be changed. I just question the methodology and some of the early conclusions, I mean, watching the feminist movement, for example, sort of eat itself when, now white feminists are being shouted down.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes.
Where does it end? And my overall thing is, for whatever reason, here we are on this plane, and there's fracturing. Everywhere we see fracturing of societal norms, of, gender relations, roles, responsibilities. And even now, it's not only just small subgroup against small subgroup. It's literally people are being fractured internally.
Yep.
And questioning, exactly what they are. And there's potential for growth there and discovery and maybe, ways that we can utilize these challenges and meet them together to truly advance as a species, which I think we need to do, or we're done.
Well, I would agree with you. There's always some value in self-reflection.
Mm-hmm.
My biggest beef with that is that it seems to be that the people who are tasked with this notion of self-reflection more than any other group of people generally happens to be the white male. I'm sorry. It's just the way it is. We have to think about how we relate to women. We have to think about how we relate to other cultures. We have to think about how we relate to other races. We have to think how we relate to other religions. We have to think how we relate to our own sexuality. I mean, we are so twisted up in knots, that we have lost our ability to be clear, functional, and direct. We have lost touch with our essential will. That's my feeling. And I don't think being self-reflective is wrong, because if you're not, you're just a robot, and we need that. But I think we've gone way past the event horizon, because I would offer this up. What other groups are asked to be so self-reflective and to take on so much of a burden of what the world is or isn't or could not be? And I don't see it. I'm sorry. What I see groups with agendas. I see groups that are aggressive, and I see groups that are willing to
mobilize towards those agendas. There's no self-reflection there. They're not being asked to self-reflect. And so I think it's good. I don't have a problem with it, but I'm willing to pass the torch. It's like, let somebody else do the self-reflection for a while. Put your culture, put your group, put your identity under a microscope, and let's see how that holds up. Without me being a judge or a critic of it, but be fair and honest. Because that's what's being,
that's why we have things like oppression pyramids, though, Robert, where, you and I, whatever conclusions we may reach through that self-reflection may or may not be, quote unquote, okay, you'd be loath to speak some of those conclusions in public in certain groups, for fear of being attacked for those conclusions. So by these purely arbitrary means, people's agency is removed from them.
Well, this is true. This is why Trump got elected, by the way. One of the reasons. Yes, absolutely. Because in the solitude of the voting booth, those who would not be able to speak their mind or whatever truth that they hold to be self-evident decided to punch a tab or hit a button on a screen.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Chris, this has been a really enlightening discussion, and I really want to thank you for coming on the show here and sharing what's going on with you and your child, soon to be an adult. And I think you've got a lot of courage and bravery and heart. And I just, really pray for the best outcome available for you and everybody involved in your family. And
Thank you.
And you just hang in there and just do your best to stay in touch with your humanity like you're doing, and it'll sort itself out, and you'll learn whatever you learn from it, and so will everyone else. So thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate the opportunity, and I hope that somebody out there may derive some benefit from this discussion. That's really all I hope.
All right. You take good care. Have a good weekend, and I'll see you out there in the virtual world at some point, okay?
I look forward to it, Robert. Take care of yourself.
Okay. Bye, Chris.
Bye.
So there you go. Went down a rabbit hole with a parent who is dealing with a very serious subject that I think probably more parents than we might know or understand are going through. It's a very challenging subject. And so my heart goes out to Chris and his family, and I hope they are able to, again, get through whatever they need to get through and get whatever it is they need to get out of it and out of that experience. So you're listening to the Friday FARcast. I'm Robert Phoenix. And it's about 1:15 here in South Central Texas. And I wanted to touch a little bit more on what I was referring to in terms of what's going on in South Africa. I wanted to pull this up here. This is a story, and it's from news.com.au. So this is an Australian website, and it looks to me like it's just a basic website. It's a news website. It is not a website that has an agenda. Okay? There's no agenda here. So I wanted to read this story. This is just a news story. That's all it is. But it's a very important news story. And this is from the 25th of March, 2017. And it says, "Bury them alive. White South Africans fear for their future as horrific farm attacks escalate." And it was written by Frank Chung, who is a reporter from fornews.com.au. And I'll read you just a couple paragraphs here so that you can understand the visceral nature of what's taking place. It says last month, British woman Sue Howarth and her husband Robert Lynn were woken at 2 a.m. by three men breaking into a window of their remote farm in Dulstrom, a small town in the northeast of South Africa, about 240 kilometers from the nearest capital city. The couple, who had lived in the area for 20 years, were tied up, stabbed, and tortured with a blowtorch for several hours. The masked men stuffed a plastic bag down Mrs. Howard's throat and attempted to strangle her husband with the bag around his neck. The couple were bundled into their own truck, still in their pajamas, and driven to a roadside where they were shot. Mrs. Howarth, 64, former pharmaceutical company executive, was shot twice in the head. Mr. Lynn, 66, was shot in the neck. Miraculously, he survived and managed to flag down a passerby early on Sunday morning. Mrs. Howarth, who police said was unrecognizable from her injuries, had multiple skull fractures, gunshot wounds, and horrific burns to her breasts. Sue was discovered amongst some trees lying in a ditch, writes Jana Boshoff, reporter for the local Middleburg Observer newspaper. Her rescuers managed to find her by following her groans of pain and then noticing drag marks in the road into the field. Her head was covered with a towel, her eyes were swollen shut. She was partially clothed with just scraps of her shirt remaining. Her breasts and her upper body were bloody. The plastic bag shoved down her throat took some effort to remove because her jaw was clamped down tightly. How she managed to breathe with the bag in her throat remains a mystery. One of her rescuers later recalled how Sue was unresponsive except for the constant groaning. Whilst the man ran back to the road to see if an ambulance has not arrived yet, she managed to curl one of her arms around her breast in a last attempt to protect herself. She was rushed to hospital and placed on life support but died 2 days later. Due to her British nationality, her murder attracted an unusual amount of overseas media attention. In any other country, such a crime would be almost unthinkable. But in South Africa, these kinds of farm attacks are happening nearly every day. This year so far, there have been more than 70 attacks, around 25 murders, and similar attacks on white farmers. Earlier this month, for example, 64-year-old Nikki Simpson was tortured with a power drill during an attack involving three men at her home on a farm in the Vaal area, about 2 hours' drive from Johannesburg. When paramedics arrived, they found 3 dead dogs and the woman lying in a pool of blood. Spokesman Russell Meering told News 24 they used a drill to torture her. Police spokesman Lungelo Delmani said, official statistics on farm attacks are non-existent due to what human rights groups have described as a cover-up by the notoriously corrupt and potentially complicit South African government. The most reliable numbers are released by the Transvaal Agricultural Union, which represents commercial farmers and civil rights groups from FARcast. According to the TAU last year, there were 345 attacks, resulting in 70 deaths, the highest death toll since 2008. In 2015, there were 318 attacks, resulting in 64 deaths, and the year before, there were 277 attacks, resulting in 67 deaths. In total, between 1998 and the end of 2016, 1,848 people have been murdered in farm attacks. How about that? 1,187 farmers, 490 family members, 147 employees, and 24 people who happened to be visiting the farm at the time. So that's how the numbers break down. While South Africa has one of the highest rates of violent crime anywhere in the world, the attacks on white farmers are no ordinary crimes. In a 2014 report, The Reality of Farm Tortures in South Africa, FARcast wrote that the horror experienced during farm tortures is almost incomprehensible. The well-known Blood Sisters from South Africa company Crime Scene Cleanup have rightly indicated, in their experience, farm tortures are by far the most horrific acts of violence in South Africa. They are of the opinion that the term farm murders is misleading and the terms farm terror and farm tortures are more suitable. There's pictures on this page that are horrific. While sometimes farmers and their families are tortured to obtain information, each has the whereabouts of the keys to the safe. Human rights groups say the excessive brutality may be intended to send a message to the general farming community: get out of our country. Victims are often restrained, harmed with weapons such as machetes, pitchforks, burned with boiling water, or hot irons dragged behind vehicles and shot. Female victims are often raped during attacks. The three men responsible for killing Mrs. Howarth, Themba William Yika, Nikashante Yika, and Lucas Makua, were arrested soon after. More than 150 farmers turned up to demonstrate outside court. But any form of justice is incredibly rare, and white farmers are increasingly questioning their future. The number of white farmers in South Africa has halved in a little over 2 decades to just 30,000. Thousands more farms are up for sale. The farmers live in fear because being a farmer in South Africa is the most dangerous occupation in the world. Henk van de Graaf, spokesman for the TAU, told Swedish newspaper Nyheter last year. The average murder ratio per 100,000, where the population of the world is 9. In South Africa, it is 54. But for the farming community, it's 138, which is the highest for any occupation in the world. Since 2007, at the direction of the government, South African police have stopped releasing statistics about the race of the victims. Monitoring Group Genocide Watch says the cover-up has been exacerbated by American and European governments, which have remained silent about the problem, reinforcing the campaign of denial. The rise in farm attacks has been blamed on increasingly anti-white hate speech, particularly from the ruling African National Congress. This is a big deal. This is a big problem, and it's a big problem because, first of all, these are people that are trying to produce food for the country. I mean, let's put that into context. They're producing food for the country. Without the farmers producing meat or vegetables or grains, South Africa will have a difficult time feeding itself. Now, they went through this in Rhodesia already. This is what happened with Robert Mugabe. After Rhodesia became Zimbabwe, the same thing happened. And, I mean, let's just play kind of a weird devil's advocate here for a moment, okay? Let's say, for an instance, that, these people came to this land, they took the land, and, let's get them off. And perhaps there's some kind of ecological and social justice there, okay? And then there's an opportunity for the people who have taken the land by force, who live there, to then take over the farming and produce food. But that didn't happen in Rhodesia. It didn't happen at all. And in fact, there was a steep decline in the production of food in what we now call Zimbabwe. Do we think that it would be any different for South Africa? Do we? I don't know. That's a problem. When you have a population base and they're being eradicated and they're feeding another member of the population base, that's a problem. Now, that's just from a societal point of view, right? It's a societal point of view. Let me just play with my gain here a little bit. So I make sure I get the right gain. But what about the bigger picture? I mean, what kind of message is this sending to the bigger picture, the world at large? What kind of Pandora's box are we opening here? It's not a pretty question to ask, because we could be looking at some very, very serious consequences as it relates to race and tribal identity, and it's not a pretty picture. It's just not. And I have gone on the record, and this is what I said when, a lot of the stuff that came out with Michael Brown and Freddie Gray and Trayvon Martin, that in many instances I really felt like the community was being manipulated. Total manipulation to pit one group against another. And to this day, this is my belief, right? Nobody really wanted to hear that. I mean, some people did, but a lot of people, they didn't want to hear that. Here we go. Just want to get my levels right. I've become like a Virgo with my levels. It's weird. But this is dangerous. We're in a dangerous place. And I'm not here to spread fear. I'm not here to create more division and divide and conquer but I just have to bring it out into the open so people are aware of it and what the media hides from us and what the media promotes. And for all of Donald Trump's stalwart efforts to enlighten us about fake news and the media, he is still falling far short of what we need to do to continue to deconstruct the reality that is being foisted upon us every single day. And this goes back to some extent to my talk with Chris and the nature of language. And that as we move further and further away from the familiarity of language and the familiarity of the family or the familiarity of some kind of belief system, perhaps it's a religious belief system, the church, the more that we move away from that, the more that we become completely disconnected and existential, and we lose our potency. We lose our ability to direct our will in a way that is meaningful, because we're spending so much time grinding on information, grinding on the right thing to say, grinding on the right way to think, and we become like the little spinning rainbow ball of death on the Apple computer, because the programs are just not responding. The CPU is overwhelmed. So in order for us to move through the world at this point in time, man, we got to be clear. We've got to be direct. We've got to figure things out. And you know what? And we may be wrong. We might be wrong. And it's okay to be wrong, because you can course correct. You can modify. You can say, well, I was a little extreme on that, but I think I got most of it right. And most people are afraid of that. Most people are afraid of making a mistake. Most people are afraid of, this is what Chris was talking about, being excoriated, or expunged, or put out on the fringe, because they may say something that other people who've been deeply programmed might find offensive. And I've said this before, most people do not want to feel alone. They do not want to feel alone. This is many reasons. This is one of the, why, his child is going through this, because there's a peer group that is supporting this mutation. So people like it when I get positive, and I come from the higher mind place. And I'm going to do my best right now to do that. I have a lot of compassion for Chris. I would not want to be in his family situation, and I'm being honest. I'm not sure how I would respond. I'd probably hang out for a while, and I'd probably throw my hands in the air and leave, or I'd say a bunch of things that might really anger some people in that family circle, and I would probably have to deal with it. And I understand in many ways why Chris does not do that, because to do that, he would alienate the only family really that he probably has. And where does he go from there?
Where does he go from there? I get it. I totally get it. I think on some level we have to be willing to die. You know? We've got to be willing to die so that ultimately we don't give a shit. And this again is no judgment around Chris and what he's going through, because I get it. But if we're going to be free, which I think is the goal here, it is for me. If we're going to be free, then we have to be willing to die for whatever it is that we are going to go through, meaning our identity, our psyche. And it's difficult. It's a very difficult thing. A lot of us don't want to face it. And you bring stuff like up that, oh my God, it's intense. You know? But if that's what it feels like. Because once you go through that, then you have no fear. And you talk to people that have had near-death experiences or people who have survived cancer, they're not dominated by fear. You know, they might have compassion and love, but they kind of know, you know, that they've gone through the ringer. There's another word I was looking for. So here we are at the end of March. Tomorrow's April Fool's Day, and it has its own resonance. By the way, I want to give an early shout out to my buddy Lawrence, whose birthday is tomorrow. Wish you a happy birthday, Lawrence. And the Fool has resonance. The Fool is everything and nothing. It is the Alpha and the Omega. The Fool is willing to act in accordance with purely undifferentiated will. The Fool's journey also always includes some form of obliteration and also some form of enlightenment, because the two seem to be inextricably linked. And the Fool is like the coyote, the trickster, in any number of traditions, and that through being foolish, the fool grows wise. So I suppose today, as we move into the Day of the Fool, April 1st, that you risk a little bit and you act the fool. Perhaps you cross lines that are supposedly sacrosanct, lines that you're really not supposed to cross. Well, what would happen if you did? What would happen if you said something that made people uncomfortable? How would that feel? What would happen if you did something that was out of character? Maybe you acted silly or playful or did something that you would never do in a public forum. How would that feel? It might feel liberating. So as we enter into the Day of the Fool, April Fools, ponder what it is that you can do out of character that might liberate who you are to a certain extent. Because when you do that, what do? You dispel fear. And fear is the greatest enemy and the most common obstacle we all face. And all fear emanates from the fear of death. That's it. That's it. And the fool laughs and smiles with his little dog at his heels in the face of it. All right, that's it for today's show. I hope you were able to derive something from it. And again, I really, really want to thank Chris for coming on and sharing his experience. And I hope that there are parents out there that are able to hear this and derive something out of it. And I hope for Chris it was an opportunity for him to talk about it and just share with some other people. All right. We'll be back on Sunday night over on the YouTube side with the live stream. We'll get in some astrology over there. We had a good show last week. Really, really, really good show. And that's about it. Oh, by the way, just a few other housekeeping things.
if you like this show, there are a couple things I don't ask for. I don't bang people for money. I don't. Every now and then I'll have like a little pledge drive thing where I'll say, hey, look, if you want to, I'm running a little special here on my website, and I'll drop $25 off of a reading. I don't bang for money, and people always tell me that I should do that more. Tell people, ask them to donate. Da, 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 da. Okay, I don't do it, but I'll tell you what I will ask: that if you listen on YouTube, subscribe to the channel. You hit the subscribe and you hit that little bell. Or if you're listening on Spreaker, become a follower. Help me build some popularity. I'm looking for more long-term kind of cachet. Because if you go into Spreaker, they've got a bunch of shows that they put on their homepage. I want to be one of those shows. And I need to build my YouTube subscription base up, and it's really just basic stuff. So if you could do that, that'd make me really, really happy, and let me continue to build on what we're doing here. And we'll have more guests come on. We'll talk about more things on Fridays. I want to get back to that. All right, use your head to discern what's real, your heart to step on what's possible. I am Robert Phoenix, and I'll see everybody who wants to be there on the live stream on YouTube on Sunday night. Have a great weekend.